Chapter 11. The Unbreakable Chain. By Dare Dancer. I continued my training with Odin until the death clock was about to hit 0. We had all gathered in the cemetery around the clock and waited for the soul's arrival. I was excited and nervous at the same time. I was afraid to find out who it was that passed away, but I was excited to see Death again. Fair warning, Death is a bit eccentric, but he can be terrifying. I warned the others. They all nodded as if they understood and braced themselves for a memorable encounter. The clock ticked down, and as soon as it hit 0, a burst of wind shot from the center of the graveyard. It began to feel as if the wind was pulling us towards our gravestone. This is going to be our first time seeing how this should work. Father Felipe laughed as he slapped Sister Grace on the butt. She replied by smashing her coffin down on top Felipe's head. I was about to ask what he meant, when a bright white flame floated into the sky from somewhere in the village. It was being pulled towards the graveyard slowly. It danced beautifully through the air as it made its way to its resting spot. Something seemed to take over Fenrir, and he howled in a unique tone. It seemed as if Fenrir had begun to sing to the flame as it danced its way into the courtyard of the church. Father Felipe and Sister Grace began to hum along in the same melody. Agatha and Odin looked at each other in confusion. I was also confused. The three Grimms sang a song of peaceful passing to the soul as it made its way to the graveyard and stopped. It danced in a single position until they finished singing their song. Their hums and Fenrir's howls dimmed and faded into silence. The whirlwind picked up again, and the soul was sucked into the ground where Fenrir and I were buried. Why did the soul get pulled into our grave? I turned around to ask the others. They all stood frozen in their place with eyes wide in horror. Or, shite. I think they caught a glimpse of me before I froze time. What lovely, funny faces they all have. Death's enchanting voice flowed out from the silence. Fenrir barked in the direction of Agatha and Odin, and my eyes focused on Death. He was standing between the two of them with his hands caressing both of their faces. He was wearing those black leather gloves of his. A wide devilish grin spread across his face, and his red eye shined like a burning star through the socket of the half-skull on his face. He turned and kissed Agatha gently on the cheek, and then turned and did the same to Odin. That is from fate. I am sorry to have frightened you. I heard him whisper to their blank stares of terror. To answer your question, the soul was pulled into Fenrir's coffin. Death stretched and sauntered his way over towards Fenrir and me. Death was in front of me with his head cocked to the side and a wide look in his eyes. I noticed deep bags under his eyes. He looked beyond exhausted. I had not noticed this on him the first time we met. Before I could think any more of it, he had yanked me off of the ground and had embraced me in a hug. I am so proud of you. I honestly did not expect you to make it. He dropped me and flipped back into the air. He plopped down in a belly flop with his chin rested gently on his fist when he landed. I used some PTO so I have some time. He let out a loud laugh and rolled over onto his back. He threw his arms and legs out wide in a star shape and stared up at the sky. Fenrir barked in excitement and rushed over to join Death. Fenrir curled up next to him and rolled over onto his back. Death began to rub Fenrir's stomach. Yakumen, Death was patting the ground next to him. I joined them and sat down. What is PTO? I asked. Death always said such weird things to me. I never thought too much of it. However, he was the angel of death, after all. Death laughed and brushed past my question. He began humming the same tune that the others had been singing to the soul as it danced into our grave. I sat and listened for a while as we all looked up and admired the beauty of the sky. I created the lands for most of those dots up there. Behemoth roared a proudful outburst. I had rested the silver scythe against my gravestone when we had first gotten into the graveyard. Behemoth's reflection appeared in the current of faces and became focused. I could see his anger burning and blue smoke pooling from the handle and gathering around the gravestone. Tyrell, please wield me, we can rescue Leviathan, he growled, but then he was frozen in place. I am really in vacation mode today. I forgot to freeze the beast. Death laughed and waved his hand. He was putting the black leather glove back onto his pale right hand. Now there should be no more interruptions. Death rolled back onto his shoulders and flung himself into an upright position. His tall black hat swayed slightly. Souls which pass on will be pulled into the Grimm's coffin. This is an extra protection for the souls against demons. A brilliant design by Peter. Death spoke as he stretched his wrists and cracked his neck and knuckles. He walked over towards our grave and thrust his fist into the ground. Death pulled a brilliant purple coffin out from the ground. This one was also unique to Fenrir. It had black bones in the shape of a wolf head, which sealed the coffin closed. A long black iron chain like the ones Father Felipe and Sister Grace had, stretched from the coffin to Fenrir's neck. The coffin was massive, about 9 feet in length. I know what you are eager to ask me. Death's flamboyant playful voice turned cold, and his eyes went dead. Death slowly tilted his head back and his devilish grin turned sour. A pulse of unseen energy shot from Death and 8 large gorgeous black wings unfolded from his back. They flicked and the feathers sent a gust of wind which knocked Fenrir and I both to the ground. Death snapped his arm out and the black obsidian scythe appeared in his hand. He thrust it down and struck the blade to Fenrir's chain. A burst of lightning shot out as sparks showered the graveyard. A thunderous explosion of sound deafened my ears. A large crack formed and stretched off into the distance. Trees began to fall over one by one as the crack continued into the forest and began to grow larger. I watched in awe as Death's strike formed a massive canyon and then exploded the massive mountain in the distance. I was frozen in awe and fear, until Death spoke again. I turned and nearly fainted from the sight. Any more effort than that and I fear others would know I was meddling. You get the point though. Death laughed and sat down on our gravestone. The black iron chain stood perfectly intact and was still stuck to Fenrir. Not even I can break a divine curse. Death sighed and waved his hand. The scythe vanished and his wings disappeared with it. Such silly creations could only be conjured by the imaginations of mortals. Who would have thought about combining a blessing and a curse? Death looked at me and stayed quiet for a few moments to let me catch up. I wanted to throw up at what he was trying to show me. No matter what we tried to do, unless we took Fenrir's coffin with us, he would not be able to leave this village, nor his duty as its Grimm. My entire world came crashing down on me. I had relied on Fenrir so heavily for so long. He gave me courage, joy, pride, hope. Everything good in life came from my best friend. The idea of abandoning him to join the others in killing a man, and then ultimately Lucifer, destroyed me. Is there nothing we can do? I asked, sadly. I jogged over and tackled Fenrir to the ground in front of Death and snuggled into his warm fur. I tried to hold back the sobs, but tears flowed anyway. Death sat silently while I cried. After a few moments Death spoke out and I got up to face him. There is one person who could break the curse, already among you. Agatha learned everything Freya knew. Freya helped Peter create the church's Grimm. Death's grin returned and he stared at me deeply. Tyrell Jackson. I am using your full name to show you how important this question is. Death laughed and tilted his head. His red crimson eyes widened in anticipation. Are you ready to sever those chains around your neck? He chuckled and waved his hand. A heavy weight pulled on my neck and I noticed black iron chains were attached to a collar I was now wearing. It is time for ya to stop relying so heavily on and hiding behind Fenrir. If ya want to free him from this curse you are going to have to get Agatha's magic back, and Odin must regain his sight. You must get their eyes back from a man. Death said seriously. Death flipped into the air and landed while thrusting his arms into the air. Colored booms of flames shot from his fingertips. His large black throne appeared behind him, and he took a seat and stared at me. He was waiting for me to process his words. I am chained to Fenrir, I thought. I looked down at the chain and then towards Fenrir. I never wanted to admit it, but I always knew I relied too much on him. I thought for a few moments and gathered my resolve. I walked over and picked up the silver scythe from where Death had knocked it to the ground. I gripped the handle and felt how perfectly my fingers wrapped around the golden grapevines. I brushed some dirt off of the blade and looked at Behemoth's rage-filled face, frozen in time. It isn't just about me and Fenrir anymore. The others all have goals outside of this village. It is an impossible decision to leave Fenrir here alone while we go hunt down Iman. However, I can't expect them to stay here with us forever. I was torn between so many different emotions. I remembered the story of my uncle Baldur and how he stopped at nothing to protect this village. He even gave up his own life challenging those he thought was threatening it. I was leaning towards staying with Fenrir when Death finally spoke out again. "Last chance, champ. Are ya ready to sever those chains?" Death got up and his chair vanished in a puff of smoke. I took a deep breath and looked at Agatha, Odin, Felipe, and Grace. I turned my gaze towards Fenrir and noticed him nod. It was as if he understood the conversation and the choices at hand. He looked determined, as if he wanted me to know he had a job to do. "I will do what it takes to end this curse and all who threaten this village. I will never abandon you here." I whispered an unbreakable oath to him. "This is gonna hurt, kiddo." Death roared with laughter. His psychotic happiness had returned. "Brace yourself." His giggling sent shivers down my spine. Death flexed his wrist out in front of him. His scythe appeared again and in an instant, I felt it slice the collar around my neck. It crashed to the ground with a loud clanking sound. Death waved his hand and the scythe vanished once more. He picked up the chains and they vanished in a puff of smoke. That was more ceremonial than anything. Death laughed as he patted my head. "Now then, are ya just gonna keep holding that thing, or are ya gonna show me how far you've come?" Death smiled and his eyebrows rose, up and down several times. I burst out laughing at his silly facial expressions. "Can you release Behemoth?" I grinned as I braced myself for a challenge. Death clapped his hands together and hopped up and down in excitement. He turned and called out to Fenrir to stay. Fenrir laid down and rested his snout onto his front paws. He watched as we stretched and prepared to spar. "My oh my, you truly are interesting." Death removed his black glove on his right hand and snapped his fingers. Behemoth blinked and a stunned look came across his reflection. He realized what had happened. "Ready, buddy?" I asked Behemoth confidently. "Let's free Leviathan," Behemoth replied. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I felt the coolness of the metal of the scythe's handle through my fingertips. I could feel energy pulsing from the weapon and entering my body. It felt like all the combined strength of all the souls I had saved so far had joined with mine. I slowed my breathing as blue smoke began to pour out from the handle of the scythe. The blue symbol of an ox began to glow on my hand. The smoke snaked its way up my right arm and made its way across my body until it snaked its way down my left arm. I widened my stance and grasped the weapon with both hands, now guarded by thick blue smoke. "Impressive work. You managed to form a contract with one of the hands of creation. Wow." Death nearly melted to his knees as his cheeks blushed and his eyes widened in admiration. I took the moment and lunged at Death with everything I had. His guard was down, and I was over him in an instant. I put all my strength into my arms and brought the blade down onto his head. I felt the contact with his hat, but then nothing but air. My swing continued and thrust my blade deep into the ground. Behemoth roared something, but the sound was muffled from being buried. I landed on my hands and knees and felt Death sit on my back. I could hear him clapping his hands before he spoke. "Impressive speed, champ. Not fast enough, however." I heard those words and jumped up and yanked the blade out of the ground. I spun around and swung at a wide angle. I missed and Death had vanished from sight. I felt a sharp pain strike the back of my head and I began to fly towards the church. I quickly turned and swung the scythe at nothing. The weight of the blade and the force of my swing made me spin to a halt and stand upright. I quickly saw where Death had struck me and launched another assault of swipes and slashes at him. He dodged all my blows like they were nothing. Behemoth roared and more smoke poured out of the handle. The smoke began to stretch down my body and more strength bulged into my muscles. I could feel myself getting faster and my strikes getting stronger. Very good. Death's laughing made it sound like he was putting no effort in at all. It enraged me. Behemoth, let's try it, I told him. You'll pass out if you overdo this. Behemoth looked worried in the reflection. Great hand of creation that formed the land through his simple touch. Through the blessing you were bestowed, I pray you bestow them upon me. I spoke those words and the smoke ignited into flames. 2 large horns of blue flame formed over my head and spread across my body. I leapt backwards and landed on the roof of the church. I ran my hand down the long deeply curved handle of the beautiful silver scythe and the blue fire formed a bowstring of smoke. It closed the half-moon shape of the weapon. I felt hot as I burned with the rage of the behemoth. You shall return Leviathan to me. Behemoth roared. The flames burned hotter, and my muscles began to ache under the strain. We will only have one shot at this, I whispered. Make it count. Behemoth replied. I jumped off the roof of the church and landed on the ground. I stomped on the ground and a large extravagant arrow formed from the earth and rose from its depths. I knocked the divine arrow onto the string of smoke and pulled back with all my strength. I could feel my muscle fibers straining and threatening to begin to snap under the weight. I was about to send the arrow flying when Death snapped his fingers again. The blue flames vanished in an instant and my extra strength disappeared with it. The arrow crumbled into dust and fell back to the ground. No need for any of that. No point in hurting yourself over nothing. Death was now sitting at a table with his legs crossed in his black wooden throne. He sipped from a tiny white fancy cup. Unfortunately, I ain't gonna be able to give his dearie back today, Death muttered between sips. I walked over and joined him at the table. I set Behemoth down against the table and pulled out a chair and Death poured me a cup of tea. It tasted like the teas we would sometimes get from the traders and travelers. I felt like I proved myself well enough. I was ready to get my answers. I turned and called out for Fenrir to join us. He ignored me and continued laying in the grass with his head rested on his front paws. His eyes were closed, but I saw his ears twitch at my calling. I told him to stay. He would not dare disobey an order from me. You should do well to remember that. Death grinned and sat back in his chair. There was never any way I could become a Grim, was there? I asked as I sipped my tea. I felt oddly comfortable. Nope, sorry bucko, I lied. Death giggled behind his hand. His crimson-red eyes radiated a warmth I had not experienced from him. Why did you really wake me up? I asked. It is all part of fate's plan. That crazy chick's been working on this plan for countless cycles. Death mumbled something about the end and the beginning. He continued to explain. All right kid, it's like this. Divine beings do not bother themselves with matters of purgatory. They believe that everyone here is already damned. Angels, great beasts, tools of creation, all the above are simply the divine, including fate and me. Unlike our siblings, however, fate and I find ourselves here often. It is the nature of our jobs. We can see what the demons are doing, and it disgusts us. We wish to free as many souls as possible, before the trumpets play. As long as they are not within a demon when the time comes, they have a chance at rebirth. Death took a moment to sip from his cup. His grin slowly spread back across his face. I woke you up to be a reaper. Death burst into laughter. I am bloody brilliant. You will be my Grim Reaper. Death looked so proud of himself at his new combination of words, even though we had both heard the phrase before. So, you and Fate want me to join the others in hunting down demons and freeing the souls they have captured? If we kill him and get Agatha's magic back, she can break the curse binding Fenrir to these lands? I asked. Bingo bango, my little mango. Death pointed his fingers at me with his thumbs sticking straight up. He moved them twice each. What happens once Fenrir is released from the curse? I asked. Death got up and the table with all the fixings vanished in a puff of smoke. He walked back towards our gravestone and pointed where the tiny crack turned into the massive canyon that led to the destroyed mountain. I stood up and my chair puffed out of existence as well. You can worry about what happens then, later. Remember that ancient kingdom buried in the mountain forged in gold? It was once ruled by a mighty king known for his victories. A kingdom which has been lost to time within the living world? Well, in purgatory here, through a man's power, it remains. Death bent over backwards and stared at me through the hole in the half-skull. His devilish grin looked genuinely wicked. My eyes widened in horror as I realized his words. I realized exactly what he was referring to. We weren't in some random village off the coast of the North Sea. He was referring to the kingdom Odin's ancestors carved and forged from the mountain itself. The one that Amun had claimed as his territory. That is right, my boy. It is time to really get this party going. Amun will be coming shortly. Death laughed maniacally. As far as Sis told me, it will be an awfully long time before we meet again. Thank ya kindly, for all the laughter. I am truly sorry for what comes next. This will not be easy for ya, but ya know what they say. What doesn't kill ya makes your bones grow back stronger or something like that. Death trailed off for a moment and mumbled different phrases before he continued. I rang Amun's doorbell. Once time flows again, Amun will be wanting to find out what or who blew up the mountain next to his kingdom. It is a good thing there is no evidence he could follow back to this village. Oh, my bad. Death's smile faded and his face twisted in an evil expression. His laughter shrieked out of him. Fenrir, come boy. Death laughed hysterically as he removed his black glove one last time, as a Fenrir came sprinting over towards my side. He snapped his fingers and bowed towards the others. Time had begun to flow like normal. A loud roaring explosion echoed through the valley as the sound of the mountain's destruction rang out. My apologies for startling y'all earlier. Please take care of Tyrell. He just may have become my favorite thing in the whole of creation. Death winked at me and was gone. I did not have much time to explain to everyone what had just happened. I quickly ran and grabbed Behemoth. My muscles spasmed and I winced at how sore they were. I am glad I did not end up releasing that arrow. The strain from using that much magical energy would have made me pass out. I would not have been awake when Amun arrived. Amun is coming here right now. I screamed as I gathered myself. Everyone gathered around me, and we guarded ourselves from all directions. Everyone mumbled different questions. Death was showing me how no one can break a Grimm's chains. When Death struck the ground, it tore it apart and exploded that mountain in the distance. Apparently, that is the mountain Odin was telling us about, the one his kingdom was built from, the one Amun claimed as his territory. I told them, it has been hundreds of years, I forgot that was my mountain. Odin looked confused and terrified at the same time. That is because I will always be drawn back to Munin. Huggins spoke as he clawed his way out of Odin's eye socket and took flight. He dove down and formed half of a spear in Odin's hands. I dare say, I am pretty sure that was my mountain. A deep chill went down all of our spines as the sound of a well-spoken voice interrupted our conversation. Not a single one of us had noticed the owl-headed demon as his two wings flapped above us. The wind from his wing beats pushed us into the ground with so much force, it split and gave way underneath us. Thousands of eyeballs darted their gaze around in horror,